How's it going, guys? Welcome to the almost end game of the Ballista build. Sheesh, it's been a long ride. Definitely been the most challenging and most rewarding build that I've probably ever done on the channel. Honestly, thank you guys so much for recommending I do this. I probably wouldn't have had the initiative to do it on my own, but now that I've done it, it's been just such a great experience. Absolutely no regrets. And I'm very happy to announce I have actually accomplished everything that I said I was going to at the end of the last video, which pretty much never happened, so that's pretty good. Full disclosure though, there is one aspect of the build that I'm still not totally happy with, so throughout the video you're gonna see the method that I used to attach the pulley to the two pipes change like 4 or 5 times, and I'm not even really going to say anything about it because I don't want to waste you guys time with a whole bunch of troubleshooting that I don't even really have a solution to right now. So in the next and very likely final video on the Ballista, I'll have that the last solution, don't get flagged, to my attaching one pulley to 2 pipes issue. Big shout out to today's sponsor, Magic Spoon. Couldn't have done it without you. More about them later, but for right now, first on the agenda, let's get this winch, baby, so I can stop messing around with them tie-down straps. I'm sure you guys remember how excited I was about the pulleys when I first got them. So bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Didn't know nothing about the world. Let me tell you guys, my tastes have refined and matured. And these days, it's all about pillow block bearing. Now, why are they called pillow block bearings? You see, I don't know. What is this green thing? Couldn't tell you. But if these things aren't epic, I don't know what is. And I do know what is. I could not be more excited to get these things slapped on, so let's get slapping. Okay, the positioning of the bearings in relation to each other and the holes that I have to drill actually have to be pretty dang precise, so I'm gonna go ahead and make a stencil of what I gotta drill. To get the distance between the bearings right, I'm gonna put the giant bolt in, put a washer on there, the webbing that I'm gonna use for the winch, another washer, and then the other bearing. So this here is basically what has to go on the Ballista, so we're gonna trace this, cut it, and bring it over to the drill press. I thought I'd be smart and staple it down so I could just drill straight through it, but it was not smart. It was actually quite silly. I really do like these Brad Point drill bits though, with a little spike on there. It's really good for hitting the exact spot you need to. So once I flip it over, I mean, dang, the holes are practically where I wanted them. It's pretty good. Now, thanks to today's sponsor, we are absolutely balling out with some 1/2-inch carriage bolts. Honestly, what looks cleaner than a fully seated carriage bolt? Probably nothing. That's honestly why I shave my head. I just want to be a fully seated carriage bolt so bad. I'm gonna grab some more of that good 3/4 inch oak plywood, and I'm gonna get to work on the gear. This is actually crazy simple. I think I figured out a pretty good way to do this. We're gonna stack up a couple of pieces and glue them together, and we're gonna do a crisscross so that we can get the dead center and put a screw in it, and then we'll do 4 more screws in the corners. This will hold the glue up really snug without putting holes in the finished gear. So I'll use my Milwaukee compass to draw myself a perfect circle, put some lines in between the lines I already drew, and I start marking them all at 3/4 of an inch. I mean, I had to do it that way. It's not like I had a compass there or anything. Now you connect that mark to the end of the next line repeatedly, and just like that, you got your gear marked out. How about that? So while that glue up setting, we're gonna work on the crank and the handle, so you can actually use the head of your bolt to mark out the cuts for the flanges that will actually connect your gear to your bolt. The winch here, honestly, was one of the few times in my whole entire building career where it was just kind of like coming to me. I usually have to think so hard about stuff like this, but it was almost like I was visited by the muse or something. The ideas were just like presenting themselves and everything was working. I just wish everything could be like that. It was so nice. And if you haven't noticed, I mean, I'll say it, I guess, I am finally at a point where I can actually make a sturdy weld. I still get a lot of spatter and they're not really that pretty, but it's finally at a point where I don't have to like question if the weld is gonna hold. Like it's there, it's solid. That is a weld, ladies and gentlemen. Luckily, a grinder and paint make me the welder I ain't. No, seriously, leave that comment. I've never seen it before. Pop your screws out, drill yourself a big old 1-inch hole in the middle of your gear, and then cut it out on the bandsaw. After I did all these main cuts, I went in and sliced off the very tips of all the teeth. Because they're so thin, they're almost like transparent. You could tell they're just gonna bust off when you're actually cranking it, and it just won't look very nice. So here it is, guys. Look at that. That is a certified winch gear. So I dropped the bolt through, and you can actually just plop it right in the bearings, and it'll keep it in place while you put the screws in. I use these slightly thicker construction screws here, and I use 3 on both sides, so hopefully that's not going anywhere. And there's really no wiggle room between the bolt and the gear, so I think it'll be pretty good. Look at that. That is smooth as butter. Now for the pawl. It's a little ticker thing that does a dink 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 when you do the crank crank crank. You know what I'm talking about? This was surprisingly simple. I just slipped a thin board with a piece of paper on top of it right under the gear, and then you can literally just trace on the gear and then draw what your pawl needs to look like. So you cut it out, trace it onto another big thick piece of plywood. Points if you recognize where this piece of plywood came from. Here's a hint. I moved my office. there you go, there's the ratchet. I am trying to downplay how happy I am that this just freaking works. This might not seem like much, but this is an accomplishment for me. I'm not very successful in the mechanical department, but very happy with this. This is good. Now this setup right here would work perfectly fine if you had your pawl going over the top and you're using gravity to operate it. But for multiple reasons, I wanted my pawl to be spring loaded, and I was playing around with ideas about compression and extension springs. But in the end, here's what I came up with, and I'm pretty proud of this one, to be honest. Put you a little screw on the inside, put your bolt through, and then what I found was this mousetrap spring. This is a variation of a torsion spring. This is the same basic kind of thing you could find in a spring clamp, which I eventually ended up actually using on this. It was much more resilient. But the idea is the same. You slide your spring down onto the axle, one end of the spring locks onto the pawl, the other end of the spring locks onto some stationary part of the frame. In this case, a little bolt works just fine. Now onto attaching the webbing to the bolt. I was very happy with how simple this ended up being. We're gonna mark out the width between the bearings with the washers on there, and then we're gonna start cutting out a flat spot in one side of the bolt. Simplest way I found to do this, make a whole bunch of cuts and then grind it all flat. Now we're gonna drill and tap a couple of holes into the flat spot. 1/4 inch is more than enough. We're gonna prepare our webbing to go on the bolt. Whenever you cut webbing, you have to melt the edge of it with a lighter or like a soldering iron or something, otherwise it'll fray and bust apart. Melting is actually a great way to get some holes in there too, so I'm gonna heat up this 1/4 inch rivet and punch my holes. Now these 1/4 inch machine screws with finish washers is all I'm gonna need. From the looks of things here, you might be thinking, isn't that just gonna tear out of the edge once you actually get some weight on there? That's actually why I'm using webbing, because it negates that issue entirely. These two little screws actually just hold the webbing on there while I get the winding started, but after the webbing loops over itself 2 or 3 times, it's actually the friction between the layers of webbing that holds it onto the bolt. And the more times it wraps around, the tighter it hangs on there. It's like if you ever wrapped a rubber band around your finger, you do it like 2 or 3 times and it's like, okay. You get the rubber band around your finger like 10 times in one spot and your finger feels like it's gonna explode. Same thing, basically. This particular webbing is made for boat winches, so it holds like 4,000 pounds. It's pretty tough stuff. Way more than what I'm gonna need for this. Now that I got the webbing on there, I can tighten down the little set screws and the bearings. Guys, pillow block bearings are the best. Like, just look at that. You tighten down the little set screw, it stops the bolt from sliding back and forth. It's just so convenient, guys. And they're cheap. They're so cheap. It was like 30 bucks for 4 of them, these giant 1-inch bearings. Can you tell I like pillow block bearings? Just PGN, hit me up. Just saying, everything moving smooth as silk. Look at that. Listen. You hear that? Here's something that I'm doing that if I were to do this again, I probably wouldn't do it, but it's still a pretty cool idea, so I'm gonna show it. I wanted a rolling handle since there's just one grip on the crank, so you can just grip it real tight and go in circles, but once you actually get up into like the really heavy zone, it basically turned the handle into one of those like rolling thunder grip trainers. Like, it made it more difficult to hold onto it, and at one point I actually kind of released a bit of tension and it slipped out of my hand and whipped around and clocked me on the back of the hand. I was pretty sure it broke my hand, but it seems fine. It's still a little puffy though. The idea is still cool though. You heat up a little bit of PVC and you slip a bearing in there that's a little bit bigger than the inner diameter of the pipe. And when the pipe cools down, the outer edge of it kind of shrinks in a little bit and it holds the bearing in there real tight. While it's cooling down though, slip a bolt through there and kind of get the bolt right in the center of the pipe, and it'll make sure your bearing's perfectly lined up. And then you just spin it around, do the same thing on the other side, and you got yourself a really nice spinny handle that you should not put on anything that can whip around and hit you in the back of the hand. Now for the crank arm, very similar to making the flange for the gear, only you're welding a nut onto it instead of the bolt. I put the cutoff end of a different bolt inside the nut to make sure I don't get any spatter in there. Weld it all around, flip it around, get the axle for your handle in the other end. It just screws right on like magic. Magic. On more than one, but less than a dozen occasions, my wife has referred to me as a cereal disposal unit. I've been known to lay waste to entire boxes of cereal for consecutive days with no signs of mercy. I tell you this to say, I'm very passionate about what I do when it comes to eating cereal. And the best way I can describe Magic Spoons: take your favorite flavors from childhood and reimagine them with a focus on protein rather than just a bunch of carbs and sugar. Sounds pretty magic to me. There's actually no sugar and 4 grams net carbs. And what kind of protein, you might be asking? Is this some kind of mealy soy protein that's gonna give me weak grip strength and make me cry at Avatar 2? Nah, not Magic Spoon. We got high quality casein and whey protein. The whey protein should be. I also really appreciate they don't have all sorts of chemical dyes, all the red 40 and yellow 30. Oh, you sunk my battleship. Naturally flavored, naturally sweetened with monk fruit extract. But let's get real, guys. I wasn't eating all that cereal because I thought it was good for me. I eat cereal because it tastes good and because it's better than being hungry. What am I even doing telling you about this stuff if this stuff is gross? If it's yucky, then what are we even doing here? Guys, I'm very happy to announce I've been on this stuff for about 2 weeks now, and it smacks. It is schlappy. It's delicious. Out of this particular box of 4 flavors, the fruity one is my favorite. I tried the chocolate, the peanut butter, the frosted. They're all great. I even mixed the chocolate and the peanut butter one together to make a flavor pretty good. What can I say? You know what I was thinking? You look like you deserve a jump start on them New Year's resolutions. Go ahead and head over to magicspoon.com/alpha. Get $5 off your order. Grab a variety pack, try all sorts of stuff. Thank you very much, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring the video. Back to it. This setup right here actually works perfect because you never actually apply pressure in the opposite direction. Even when you got the bow drawn back and you decide that you want to release the draw and you disengage the winch and you start going in the opposite direction, all of the pressure is still going against the threads. So with this setup here, the handle's locked on there in the direction that you need it, and if you ever need to take the handle off, maybe to transport it or something, you can spin it in the opposite direction. It just pops right off. It's real convenient. Handle slips on like this. Very convenient and deadly. Don't do this. But just look how nice it spins. So, semi-sad moment. As soon as I finish the winch, I look over at the PVC and I notice that it's actually starting to crack where I put the bolt. I say semi-sad because, to be honest, out of everything that I've built so far, I think this whole little thing that I got going on here is probably what I felt the least good about. So the fact that it's actually failing forces me to come up with something better, which in a way is kind of a relief. So here's my solution, and boy is it a doozy. In that moment, I thought it would be an easy fix. Like I said, we'll talk about this later, okay? Anyways, in the last video I said I had a solution to my classic pulley setup where you've got the reserve strings running on the same level as the bowstring, so they're kind of in the way, so you have to put them over the non-sus pipe and there's just tons of friction and just not an ideal situation. I said I had a solution, and boy do I. Here's the thought process. And this is not a humble brag. I'm actually not good at sketching, so bear with me. So here's the bowstring. The problem is down here, the reserve string is directly in line with the bowstring, and this is where that non-sus pipe comes in, where we're basically just doing anything we can to get this out of the way. So I got to thinking, what if instead of doing that, instead we anchor the bowstring to the base and we run it over the pulleys. Problem is, I realized that even though you do get more draw length this way than if you just ran a string straight across, you still don't get nearly as much as you would need to be able to draw it back all the way before the limbs just crack. So then I got to thinking, what if I put 2 pulleys down here locked onto the base, and we connect to the center of this pulley, come around here, go over the top there, and boom. Now I thought this was a pretty solid idea, and it actually kind of is. The only issue is all of this and all of this is reserve string, so you're increasing your draw length so much that it pretty dramatically reduces your draw weight. And if you try to cheat the system and just string it really, really tight, well then you're actually missing out on all this draw length here. So this setup was officially a no-go, but the longer I looked at these pulleys here, kind of got my gears turning. I still had a decent amount of that Schedule 80 PVC left over. Not too much, but enough. And thinking about putting those pulleys at the bottom, it got me thinking even more. If instead of the prod at the front, I had 2 sets of limbs running in opposing directions with pulleys, that would not only increase my draw length, that would increase my draw weight too. So from that moment, it was like, yeah, why wouldn't I do this? And guys, the result is something very nice to look at. So the issue with the non-sus pipe and the strings, that, yeah, eliminated. Donezo. Another one in the books. Onto the trigger mechanism. So I've seen a lot of really good, really solid designs for ballista trigger mechanisms, but I wanted something that you could choose between either knocking your bolt or just kind of sitting it in the track like you would with a typical ballista. The other thing I wanted was for it to self-engage when you push it forward, so you're not worrying about, like, you know, you push this thing down and slide this thing under and put the string over here. And I have some very particular plans for this ballista, so I needed this particular trigger mechanism. So here's what I'm doing. We start by welding up this really simple sliding frame. It's just some angle iron and some flat bar, and I didn't have any tubing that was thick enough that I'd be comfortable welding it, so what I did was I took some 1/2-inch nuts and I stacked them up all lined up on a 3/8 bolt. So now when you weld them down, it basically creates like a tube that a 3/8 bolt can loosely fit inside of. So this trigger mechanism is not exactly a release. Like, it's not holding the string and then dropping it. It's holding the string back and then sliding out. So that's going to be a lot of friction on the point where it slides. So you want to reduce that as much as you can, or at least spread the area that it's rubbing against as much as you can. So the way I'm doing that is I'm cutting these bullet Vienna sausage things out of this, what is this, a 5/8 bolt? I don't remember. A very thick bolt. I round out the top of it and I'm welding it onto the fork, just past the fork, so the string is resting on it, but I still get that little ramp on the front of it from the fork, so I can still just like push it right under the string. And there it is, a pretty legit trigger mechanism. You can also wax the string, and that's gonna cut down so much on the friction. So here we are, guys, last legs of the video. Ooh, legs, that's kind of a pun. The string stopper is hardly worth mentioning. So easy. You cut a couple squares of the plywood, you cut one into quarters, you cut the other one in half, you glue them, you stack them, you screw them, you slap them onto the supports, and then you screw them again. Then I use a bunch of this double-sided Gorilla Tape to stick these big thick rubber pads onto the stoppers. These things are pretty robust. I do believe they will stop a string. And for the stand, this is pretty cool. This was the leg pun thing that I was talking about. First, we cut ourselves a circle out of plywood. I couldn't get it perfect with the jigsaw, so I screwed it to a 2x4 and gave it a little spin in the bandsaw. That's pretty nice, very satisfying. Now we divide that circle into thirds. Here's a pretty easy way to do it. You do a mark down the center and you set your compass to be... Is it compass or compass? I feel like compass is the direction thing, but compass just feels weird. Compass feels cringe. Set that thingy to half the diameter of the circle. Plant the compass at the bottom of the line that you drew and give it a little swoop. And then the two ends of that swoop you can connect to the center of the circle and then use the top half of that line that you drew at first as your final third line. And there it is, circle divided into 3 parts. So I'll mark on those lines where I'm gonna put my screws, and then I'll mark a center line on some 2x4s that I cut some angles on. I think it was maybe a 55 degree angle. Can't remember, sorry. Screw the 3 legs onto the circle best you can. It doesn't have to be perfect since it's 3 legs, it's gonna be self-leveling. Now with these additional supports in between the legs, this thing is rock solid, it ain't going anywhere. I throw this piece of 2x4 up here for a thicker base to screw into. And here is yet another pretty cool idea that I had. I was thinking about how I would make a universal joint and how I would do it a lot easier than I've done it in the past. And then I realized the universal joint is basically a swivel caster with no wheel in it. So guess what I got at Home Depot? Well, I think it's safe to say that's pretty sick. Like I said before though, it's way too cold to shoot it outside. The PVC limbs would get really brittle, and I don't have all that much room in here, so we're gonna have to save the shooting test for next time. But thank you guys very, very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you later. Bye. Actually, you know what? It is pretty chilly. I could use some firewood.
Fatality.
Oh my gosh. What on earth? It survived. It's perfectly intact. You know what's crazy? I almost didn't put this here. I have a feeling I'd be at the neighbor's house asking about a 50 BMG on a stick. Now, thank you very much for watching. Talk to you later. Bye.